In my experience, struggling farms fall into like four main categories. Now they overlap and they work with each other when things get worse and worse, but I want to go over them because it's important to understand if you are struggling in a distressed operation of what maybe was the root cause to start with, and that would help someone try to find a solution to what they're dealing with. So the first category is just simply cost structure, meaning they have too high land costs, they have too high production costs. It's usually tied to growth and probably not having enough equity for whatever endeavor they're going into. So it's not a question of whether the farmers are good at daily execution or that they're not knowledgeable or anything like that. It's just mainly a workable, the deal's not workable, meaning if you bought land too aggressively or you expanded too aggressively, you could just have such a high cost structure that it doesn't work. This one speaks more towards like how it looks on paper. So that's tied to a lot of the tools and stuff I've made. So what I mean by that is you could give the structure of the operation to say 10 or 15 peers, whether those are farmers or lenders or combination of those, and just ask, does this operation even like work on paper? And they just say it just doesn't, like the way that market prices are and their costs and everything. And they probably, again, it's usually tied to growth, but it's just simply cost structure. The second category would be operational management. So this would distinguish between having a workable cost structure, but for some reason things just aren't working. And when you look into it more, this can be a combination of, and speaking with crops, it'd be agronomic decisions, or animal husbandry, time management, even just daily management, labor management. I would also make an argument that this could speak to just being spread too thin. So you could have someone who has a crop enterprise, a livestock enterprise, they got into some custom deal and maybe some other deal, and all of a sudden they've got like four things going on, and maybe they would be great at doing any one of those things, but when you have four of them you're trying to manage, and then maybe you have labor, you have some hired help, and it can become very complex very quickly. And even someone who's a very competent person, they can just be spread too thin. So that's another form of like a tax on management. The third category would just be personal issues. So sometimes the farm itself it has a workable cost structure. The person is a good manager. So then you're like, well, if we isolate the farm, it actually shows it's making money, but there's things outside the farm that are causing problems with the farm. Number one most common example is high family living. Oftentimes this is brought about by, because farming's cyclical. Sometimes during a couple good years, someone goes out and does something that kind of locks them into just a higher living trajectory, meaning they build a new house or they buy a second home, or they just get used to having a lifestyle that people often say it's hard to go back, right? So like once you get used to really good food or like fine dining and nice clothes and like traveling or different things, it's hard to adjust to decreases in income. So it could be like a structural living thing where the house is too big, vehicles are obvious, but it could be, I would bring in more personal issues. It could be supporting children, it could be just compulsive shopping and spending and eating out like on a daily basis. But it could also be substance abuse, gambling problems. So like those are personal issues that then usually get financed into the farm in a restructure. Then it increases your cost structure. Then it makes it harder to manage. And now see where the circular stuff is going. Then the fourth category I would call just like an external shock. So let's go through it. The cost structure is okay. Managerial wise, they're farming, they're executing okay. So like the farm's doing okay. And then on the personal standpoint, they don't have excessive living. Nothing appears to be crazy. Things are humming along. But then here comes an external shock, and that could be something like a health problem just comes out of nowhere with you or someone in your family. It could be a death in the family. you know, it could be uh, a death, and it could be something with like the farming structure, meaning like your partner, say you farm with your brother and your brother dies, or you farm with your dad dies, and then it brings about a bunch of issues related to an estate. And then another huge one is very common is just a divorce. So like you could have all these, you could check every box, and then there's a divorce in the family, and it just causes problems. So the important part here is that these categories are never really stay separate. So like a high cost structure causes financial stress, can lead into mental stress, which causes management problems. You restructure, and it just creates this like snowball downhill effect. So or you start with a good farming operation, but then they have like a external shock like health or a divorce or something, and then it taxes the farm, and then it has to be financed into the farm, and then now the cost structure is high. But the other thing I would mention real quick is like the well-beaten path is that there's like iterations of problems that get financed into the farm, and then the cost structure gets higher and higher. It all goes back to cost structure, which can be the start of a problem, or it can become the problem because of these other issues. So the situation here is that you have to start with what's the underlying source of the problem and how we got there.